Very big thank you to the World Craft Forum for acknowledging the small efforts that we've done at Adyam Handwoven. And of course, an immense gratitude for giving me this opportunity to share my views on the craft going forward and how we practice it at Adyam. Actually, there is an audience here, such an esteemed audience who I look up to and I have learned from. So it is really very sort of humble of, I feel really the gratitude to be able to say these few words. I would like to share primarily a journey, but more important than that, a journey is the belief and the practices that we act upon at Adyam and which have sort of made us understand craft more closely. I would like to look at it in three buckets, which is interactions, interventions, and inroads. If I start with interactions, I think the most important thing as we realize, and this is something which I think should be perhaps practiced world over and probably is practiced, is that how craftsmen need to be looked at not as vendors but as partners. So any business that interacts with them has to have the sensitivity to be able to see them as partners, because they probably are not driven the way the typical vendors are driven, because vendors are driven by volume, they're driven by better margins, they're driven by many other commercial aspects, but these guys are artists. They are people who actually value the fact that somebody has come to them to co-create with them. And it is therefore extremely important to look at them as partnerships, as collaborations, and therefore how does one inculcate that is through a complete transparency, which is something which is extremely difficult sometimes, but it's something which should never be lost, because the transparency that one actually can communicate is what actually gives them the confidence to continue working with you. And that is the kind of, so to say, the comfort level as well as the confidence that one needs to build. Secondly, I do feel that it is something which we all in our own ways try to do, but it is at a point where we have to actually bring back the respect that craft is supposed to have, because we have done many years of actually looking at it in a certain way, which probably has taken away the due respect that an art form should get, as distinct from just the product itself. We at our end try to work with them in a manner where we let them do what they do best, which is create beautiful, fabulous products, but at the same time bring them into our fold and give them a sense of how they can actually become mini entrepreneurs by themselves, which is therefore a way to actually make them understand what the value of their craft is, what is it that they need to value it at. And I would probably say this, though it is a debatable point, but I would say that our effort is to bring the value to the craft, but not necessarily upping the value of the craft. Because I do truly believe that the minute we say that we would actually take it to a more premium end, which automatically would mean that the consumers would stop to engage with it, because the consumers do at some point hesitate to convert beyond a certain price point. So it is extremely important to be able to assess the value of each of the craft that it really deserves, and therefore bring it to the audience in a manner where it actually is something where the audience feels the comfort to be able to convert on it. Getting on to the interventions, I think whenever we work with craft or such a thing which has a very true heritage value, it is a very responsible, it is an extremely responsible act. One needs to have a really deep understanding of it before one can start meddling with it. One can start to engage with it or in a way evolve it, because it definitely does need to evolve as the time passes by. It does need to become relevant as we continue to make it relevant for the rest of the world as well. However, it is extremely important to not distort it. It is important to keep the signature intact. It is important to let it remain in the way it is recognized the world over, so that tomorrow it is not something which is replaceable. It can never become something which is somewhere else, and therefore somebody can actually find a manner of creating it in a manner which is not the original, authentic, and therefore perhaps not of the same value. So this ecosystem is something which really needs to be understood and therefore respected. And also more importantly, I think a lot of brands, and I'm talking again from the business point of view, look at it as an impact and rather than just pure commerce, which is a great way to look at it. However, impact is also something which sometimes is perhaps important to understand it in the right frame of mind, and perhaps it should not be just seen as grants or subsidy, but it should really be seen as how one can actually enable craftsmen to be able to create their own livelihood and to create a sort of a infrastructure around them so that they can actually stand on their own after we have sort of handled them for the kind of time that they require from us. Lastly, and just getting into the inroads part, which is, of course, the most important part as to how one can actually take craft to the rest of the world and to the audience. Again, it is all a lot about how one actually needs to create a sensitivity around it, to be able to educate the audience, to be able to tell them through storytelling as to how one can actually know the behind the scenes of the craft, because till they don't really get behind the scenes, they don't really get as to why does it cost what it costs. Only when one actually can narrate that whole storyline and tell them that this is how precious it is and this is how much time and effort and skill somebody has utilized to be able to create this thing specially for you as an exclusive piece, I see audience converting immediately without even questioning as to why it is for the kind of price that it is for. Therefore, it is important for us to show it as an art form and not just as a commodity product. And since it is anyway each piece by itself, it is something that deserves to be seen that way. However, since it is directly linked to the amount of effort the craftsmen put in it, I think that's where the value needs to be assessed. And therefore, we have something which could be as low as 100 rupees and something which could be as high as 5 lakhs. So the craft world has this immense opportunity to be able to promote every kind of art form and every kind of craft. The last and the most important point which I feel is to maybe, and again it's a point of view that maybe we need to move away from the word ethnic, because ethnic has a dictionary meaning which means racial, belonging to a race, belonging to a community. And I don't think craft has any such thing, because craft is a talent which, yes, comes from a community, but there is no need for us to call a product ethnic. And therefore, it is extremely important for us to give it a global point of view, give it a global presence, give it a global relevance, and therefore make it something which is good for anywhere as long as it has a utility in that space. I urge all of you to also look at our Prachin exhibit, which is showcasing at Tantav Hall, and which is where we in our small way are celebrating our craftsmen, because what we do is we call it as living heritage. And this is a pleasure that we all actually have in India, that we actually wear what is worthy of museum as well as what we can actually continue to weave. And this is what we have put together is an exhibit called Prachin, and I would really request all of you to get the flavor and encourage our artisans. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manish, for highlighting the